Cotton and Chains, a slave descendant's quest for truth. Chapter 1. Roots in Shackles. The journey of a slave descendant begins with the painful acknowledgement of a history filled with suffering and oppression. This chapter explores the protagonist's first steps in uncovering their ancestry, diving into old records, and tracing their lineage back to the days of slavery. The protagonist's search begins in a quiet library, where they sift through brittle pages of history, scanning census records, property deeds, and old newspaper clippings. They soon come across a plantation ledger that lists their ancestors as property, reducing their existence to mere numbers and monetary values. The realization that their family was once bought and sold like cattle sends a chill through their spine. The weight of history presses down on them as they imagine the countless stories of suffering hidden in the faded ink of those documents. Their journey takes them beyond the archives and into the rural South, where abandoned plantations still stand as silent witnesses to the past. They walk through the remnants of slave quarters, the air thick with the ghosts of history. The wooden shacks, now decayed and overtaken by nature, once housed generations of enslaved people who labored from dawn till dusk with no hope of escape. The protagonist runs their fingers over the rough wood of a doorframe, trying to envision the lives once lived within those walls. The whispered prayers, the muffled cries, and the stolen moments of resilience and defiance. As they visit a local museum, they listen to recordings of formerly enslaved individuals who once recounted their harrowing experiences. Their voices, though faint with age, hold immense power. The protagonist hears an elderly woman describe how her parents were sold when she was a child, how she remembered the sound of chains rattling as families were torn apart. Each word etches itself into the protagonist's heart, igniting an unquenchable desire to uncover the full truth of their ancestry. At home, they sit with their grandmother, who has long been the keeper of family history. She recalls stories passed down through generations, tales of defiance, survival, and even quiet rebellion. She speaks of an ancestor who escaped through the Underground Railroad, of songs with hidden messages that guided people to freedom, and of the courage it took to dream beyond the chains. As she speaks, her voice trembles with both sorrow and pride, and the protagonist realizes that their history is not just one of suffering, but also of immense resilience and strength. This chapter ends with the protagonist staring at an old tattered photograph of their great-great-grandfather, whose name they have only just learned. They now see him not just as a relic of the past, but as a man who endured, survived, and paved the way for them to stand where they are today. With renewed determination, they vow to continue uncovering the truth, ensuring that the stories of their ancestors will never be forgotten. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Ancestors. Memories are not just preserved in books, but also in bloodlines. The protagonist starts piecing together fragments of oral history passed down through generations, feeling the weight of stories whispered over kitchen tables and campfires, in church pews and front porches. These echoes from the past guide them toward lost relatives, hidden family narratives, and the struggles of survival that have shaped their lineage. Sitting with elders, they hear recollections of ancestors who navigated treacherous landscapes in search of freedom, of a great-grandmother who stitched messages into quilts, of a great-uncle who fled a plantation and lived among maroons in the swamps. Each story, though incomplete, forms a patchwork of resistance and resilience. As the protagonist listens, they begin to understand how their forebears found strength in faith and community, using spirituals not just for worship, but as coded messages. A simple hymn, when sung in a certain way, could signal an escape route. A lantern placed in a window could mean it was safe to flee. The stories unravel a complex network of communication and unity that allowed enslaved people to navigate the world against all odds. Through careful questioning, they discover a distant cousin who has preserved letters and keepsakes belonging to an ancestor who lived through the Reconstruction era. A faded diary entry reveals a painful account of the first taste of freedom, bittersweet and uncertain, full of hope but shadowed by the threat of violence and systemic oppression. The protagonist realizes that their ancestors' whispers are not just remnants of the past, but lessons for the present, guiding them toward a deeper understanding of their own place in history. Chapter 3: The Plantations' Shadows. Visiting the remnants of an old plantation, the protagonist steps into the past, standing where their ancestors once toiled. The crumbling slave quarters and abandoned fields serve as a grim reminder of the pain and endurance that shaped their family's past. The air is thick with history as they wander through the overgrown pathways where once their ancestors' footsteps marked the ground in exhaustion and perseverance. The plantation house, though weathered by time, still looms over the land, a stark contrast to the remains of the small, dilapidated cabins where enslaved families once lived. The protagonist imagines the hushed whispers of the past, the rhythmic hum of spirituals carrying hope through the night, the quiet sobs of children torn from their parents, and the crack of the overseer's whip echoing across the fields. In the slave quarters, they run their hands over the rough wooden walls, each splinter a silent witness to the struggles endured within. Inside, they find a rusted iron shackle, a cruel artifact of control and subjugation. Holding it, they feel an overwhelming mix of sorrow and anger. It is a tangible link to their ancestors' suffering, a reminder of lives reduced to servitude and suffering. As they explore further, they uncover an old ledger buried in the plantation's archives. The brittle pages list the names of enslaved individuals alongside their ages, skills, and prices. Among them, they find their ancestor's name, an identity stripped of freedom, assigned only a monetary value. The protagonist stares at the inked words, a chilling confirmation of the dehumanization their family once endured. Yet, amid the pain, they also uncover evidence of resistance and resilience. A secret compartment in one of the cabins reveals an old, tattered Bible with notes scribbled in the margins. Coded messages that once helped enslaved individuals communicate escape plans. A hidden underground tunnel suggests that some sought freedom despite immense risks. These discoveries remind the protagonist that their ancestors were not merely victims, but fighters, survivors who clung to hope in the darkest of times. This visit is more than a history lesson. It is a confrontation with a painful truth. The protagonist begins to understand the economic machinery that thrived on slavery, realizing that the wealth built on their ancestors' backs still benefits some, while leaving others in generational poverty. As they leave the plantation, they carry a newfound sense of duty to tell the untold stories, to honor their ancestors' sacrifices, and to ensure that history is never buried again. Chapter 4: Broken Barns, Broken Souls. Families were torn apart during slavery, with loved ones sold and separated forever, often never to be reunited. The agony of these forced separations left emotional scars that transcended generations. This chapter delves into the trauma that continues to echo through time, manifesting in strained relationships, lost identities, and deep-seated wounds that are difficult to heal. The protagonist pieces together the stories of their ancestors, learning of a great-great-grandmother who watched helplessly as her children were sold off one by one, never knowing if they survived. They read the testimonies of formerly enslaved individuals who described the gut-wrenching pain of being dragged away from their mothers, fathers, and siblings. The last sight of their family members etched in their minds forever. Each story they uncover adds to the weight of their grief, making them painfully aware of how this cycle of loss shaped the emotional landscape of their lineage. Sitting with a family elder, the protagonist listens to accounts of how the trauma of separation influenced later generations. They learn of ancestors who struggled with attachment, unable to form strong familial bonds for fear of losing loved ones again. Some turned inward, suppressing their pain, while others passed down an unspoken rule of emotional distance, afraid of becoming too close to those who could be taken away. The protagonist also begins to understand how the disruption of families during slavery affected cultural identity. Last names were erased or forcibly changed, family histories were deliberately obscured, and oral traditions were interrupted. Rebuilding these connections feels like an impossible task, but each fragment of history recovered serves as a step toward healing. Despite the sorrow that lingers in their bloodline, the protagonist also discovers stories of resilience. They learn of enslaved families who created new kinship bonds in place of lost ones, forming chosen families in the face of brutality. They uncover tales of mothers who sang lullabies laced with secret messages of strength, of fathers who risked their lives to search for stolen children, and of siblings who found each other decades after slavery had ended. The protagonist realizes that although slavery shattered families, it did not destroy the love that bound them. The pain of the past is undeniable, but so is the resilience of those who refuse to let their identities and connections be erased. As they reflect on their own place in this legacy, they vow to reclaim and rebuild what was lost, to mend the broken bonds and heal the broken souls. Chapter 5: A Name in the Wind. What's in a name? For the protagonist, everything. Tracing their surname, or lack thereof, uncovers deeper truths about their origins, leading them down a path of self-discovery that is both painful and enlightening. Many enslaved people were given the names of their enslavers, or had their true names erased, severing their connection to their heritage. The protagonist begins their search by combing through historical documents, speaking with genealogists, and even taking a DNA test to uncover any traces of their ancestry that might have survived the forced erasures of the past. As they dig deeper, they uncover multiple variations of their surname across different records, each one a potential clue, but also a reminder of how identities were rewritten at the hands of those in power. A particularly striking revelation comes from a faded legal document that lists their great-great-grandfather under two different names, one assigned by an enslaver and another used within the enslaved community. This duality forces the protagonist to question what their real name would have been had history not interfered. Determined to reclaim a sense of identity, they turn to oral history, speaking with family elders who recall whispered stories of an ancestor who refused to take the name of their oppressor. Instead, this ancestor secretly preserved their true name, passing it down through generations in coded references hidden within lullabies and folk tales. This realization gives the protagonist a newfound sense of connection, not just to their name, but to the resilience of their lineage. The search also takes them beyond the United States as they look toward Africa, trying to trace the origins of their bloodline before slavery tore their ancestors away. They connect with scholars who help them understand the naming traditions of West African cultures, where names carry deep meanings tied to lineage, circumstances of birth, and ancestral honor. The possibility that their ancestors had names rich with meaning, erased by forced assimilation, deepens their resolve to reclaim what was lost. Finally, after months of research, they find a record from the early 19th century, a rare mention of a free black ancestor who lived in a northern state before the Civil War. Seeing this name, untainted by forced ownership, feels like a moment of triumph. The protagonist decides to incorporate this name into their own, not just as an act of reclamation, but as a tribute to the unbreakable spirit of their forebears. This chapter concludes with the protagonist standing before their family's ancestral graves, whispering the name they have rediscovered into the wind. It is both an act of remembrance and a promise to carry forward the legacy of those who came before, ensuring that their true names, their true identities, are never erased again. Chapter 6: Echoes from the Past. Documents, letters, and journals reveal voices from the past that had long been silenced. The protagonist uncovers an ancestor's personal account of their journey to freedom, shedding light on the emotional and physical toll of enslavement. As they sift through fragile pages and faded ink, they begin to piece together a narrative of endurance, loss, and hope. One journal, hidden in the attic of a distant relative, tells the story of a great-great-grandfather who risked everything to escape bondage. The pages describe the relentless fear of capture, the hunger gnawing at his stomach as he traveled under the cover of darkness, and the fleeting moments of kindness from strangers who risked their lives to help him along the way. Each sentence is a revelation, painting a vivid picture of both terror and resilience. Among the papers, the protagonist finds letters exchanged between family members separated by slavery. One letter, penned in shaky handwriting, is from a mother pleading for news of the children who had been taken from her. Another, written years later by a freed ancestor, speaks of reunion attempts thwarted by distance and systemic oppression. The emotional weight of these words is overwhelming, reinforcing the lasting scars that enslavement left on families. The protagonist also discovers a rare first-hand account of life after emancipation, an ancestor who described the struggle to build a life from nothing, facing racism, violence, and laws designed to keep formerly enslaved people in poverty. Despite these hardships, the letters radiate a quiet strength, a determination to survive and carve out a future for the next generations. These long-lost voices from the past become more than historical artifacts. They are living proof of the struggles, sacrifices, and resilience that define the protagonist's heritage. With each uncovered document, they feel closer to their ancestors, more connected to the pain and the triumphs that shaped their family's journey. The chapter closes with the protagonist holding the journal close, whispering a silent promise to honor these voices by ensuring their stories are never lost again. Chapter 7: Chains that Never Broke. Although physical chains were broken with emancipation, systemic oppression continued to shackle the lives of formerly enslaved people. This chapter delves into the brutal realities of the post-slavery era: Jim Crow laws, segregation, and racial violence that kept the protagonist's ancestors in a state of bondage long after slavery was legally abolished. The protagonist uncovers court cases, first-hand accounts, and newspaper articles documenting the struggles of their forebears. They read about black codes that criminalized everyday freedoms, forcing many into convict leasing, a system that was slavery by another name. Stories of lynchings and race riots paint a grim picture of the racial terror that loomed over every aspect of life, from voting rights to education and employment. Through interviews with historians and visits to museums, the protagonist begins to grasp the depth of racial injustices that persisted for generations. They stand in front of a dilapidated schoolhouse where black children once received subpar education due to segregation, and they visit the site of a historic sit-in where brave activists challenged inequality. Each discovery strengthens their understanding of how institutional racism did not end with slavery, but evolved into new forms of oppression. The protagonist also uncovers family stories of resistance, ancestors who became activists, educators, and community leaders, fighting against an unjust system. They learn of a great-grandfather who risked his life to register black voters in the South, and a grandmother who joined civil rights protests despite the dangers. These stories remind them that while oppression persisted, so did resilience, courage, and the unyielding fight for justice. As the chapter closes, the protagonist reflects on the legacy of systemic racism and its echoes in the present. They realize that the struggle for equality is not just history, it is an ongoing battle, one they feel compelled to continue in honor of their ancestors. Chapter 8. The Secret Ledger. In the dim glow of the archive room, the protagonist's hands tremble as they flip through the brittle pages of an old plantation ledger. Dust swirls in the air as history unfolds before them in ink-stained entries. Each line records a life reduced to a transaction. Names, ages, and prices scrawled alongside notations of skills and conditions. Their heart pounds as they recognize the names of their ancestors, listed like inventory, bought and sold without agency or dignity. The weight of the revelation crushes them. This is more than just a document, it is a ledger of lost humanity. A chilling testament to the inescapable truth that their family was once considered mere property. They trace their fingers over the faded ink, feeling a mix of grief and rage. How could something so personal be so coldly documented? As they read further, another horrifying detail emerges. Attestations of forced separations. A mother sold to one estate, her child to another, never to see each other again. The words blur through their tears, imagining the cries of despair and the unrecorded suffering behind each entry. These pages do not just catalogue names. They chronicle heartbreak, severed bonds, and lives reshaped by cruelty. Determined to honor those forgotten in these pages, the protagonist makes copies of the ledger, vowing to bring these stories into the light. This discovery is not just about the past. It is a reminder that their ancestors' pain must be acknowledged, their names must be spoken, and their stories must be reclaimed. The inhumanity of history will not define them. Instead, it will fuel their resolve to ensure that such suffering is never forgotten. Chapter 9. Blood on the Cotton. The protagonist stands in a vast cotton field, the hot sun beating down on their skin, As they run their fingers over the delicate white fibers, a gentle breeze carries the scent of earth and history, rustling the cotton plants that stretch endlessly before them. As they close their eyes, they can almost hear the echoes of past voices, the weary sighs, the muffled cries, the songs of survival that once filled this space. They imagine the hands that bled to pick this cotton, hands cracked from endless labor, nails worn down, fingers stained with the evidence of suffering. The cotton, so soft and pure in appearance, hides the brutality of its past. It was both a source of wealth and a tool of oppression, a crop that shaped the economy while breaking countless lives. Kneeling down, the protagonist grasps a ball of cotton, feeling the sharp edges of the dried husk prick their skin. The pain is fleeting, but it is enough to remind them of the agony their ancestors endured. They picture their great-great-grandmother, bent over in the field from sunrise to sunset, her back aching, her spirit unbroken. They see children, too young to understand their bondage, forced to pluck cotton under the watchful eyes of overseers. Tears sting their eyes as they realize that this land, so seemingly peaceful now, was once a battleground of forced labor and silent resistance. Yet, within that suffering, there was also resilience. Those who toiled here did more than just survive. They planted seeds of defiance, of hope, of a future where their descendants would walk freely on this very soil. The protagonist takes a deep breath and rises, standing tall amidst the cotton. They refuse to let this symbol remain one of pain alone. It is also a testament to endurance, to strength, to the unyielding spirit of those who came before. With renewed determination, they step forward, carrying their ancestors' legacy with them. Chapter 10. A Letter from Freedom. The protagonist carefully unfolds the fragile, yellowed paper, their fingers trembling as they trace the faded ink. The letter, penned in shaky yet deliberate handwriting, carries the weight of history. Words that traveled across time, finally reaching their descendants' hands. It is a message from a newly freed ancestor, a soul who had endured the unimaginable and lived to tell the tale. My dearest family, I write to you with a heart both heavy and light. The letter begins. The chains are gone, yet their echoes remain. Freedom is a strange thing, so long desired, and now that it is here, it feels like a new kind of battle. The protagonist reads on, feeling the raw emotion in each word. The letter speaks of the joy of no longer being owned, the newfound ability to choose where to walk, where to sleep, whom to love, but woven within the joy is the struggle, the reality of freedom without guidance, without land, without promise. Their ancestor speaks of the search for lost family members, the fear of white retaliation, and the need to build a future from nothing. Despite these hardships, hope radiates from the ink. We were not meant to be shackled. We were born to be free. I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I know that we must walk forward, and if I do not see you again in this life, know that I am walking toward you always. Tears slip down the protagonist's face as they clutch the letter to their chest. This is more than just an artifact. It is proof of resilience, a testament to survival. They vow to honor their ancestors' words, carrying their dream of true freedom into the present. Chapter 11. Buried Histories, Hidden Truths. Not all truths are easy to accept, and sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones left unspoken. As the protagonist delves further into their family history, they encounter unexpected resistance from relatives who prefer to leave the past undisturbed. Old wounds resurface, and conversations become strained as fears of reliving trauma overshadow the importance of uncovering the truth. One evening, during a family gathering, the protagonist cautiously brings up their findings. A ledger detailing the sale of their ancestors, letters exchanged between enslaved family members, and oral histories from elders who had long kept their stories hidden. Silence falls over the room, heavy and charged. Some family members express anger, not at the protagonist but at the past itself, at the cruelty and injustice that still lingers in their bloodline. Others refuse to engage, insisting that dwelling on history will only bring pain rather than healing. Tension mounts as the protagonist struggles to balance their need for truth with the emotional toll it takes on their loved ones. They seek guidance from a grandmother who, after much hesitation, shares her own memories. Stories whispered in hushed tones, fears passed down through generations, and the burden of knowing but never speaking. Her voice wavers as she recounts the sacrifices made by those who came before, and for the first time, the protagonist sees not just resistance, but fear. Fear of what the truth might change, fear of how it might shape the future. Despite the resistance, the protagonist remains steadfast. They begin recording oral histories, preserving the stories before they are lost. With time, some family members soften, realizing that remembering is not just about pain, but about honoring those who endured. In breaking the silence, the protagonist hopes to create a bridge between the past and the present, ensuring that their ancestors' voices will no longer be buried in forgotten histories. Chapter 12, North Star's Calling. Inspired by the journey of those who followed the North Star to freedom, the protagonist embarks on their own path of self-discovery and reclamation. The North Star, once a beacon of hope for escaping slaves, now serves as a symbol of guidance in their quest to unearth their family's past and embrace their identity. Standing beneath a vast night sky, the protagonist reflects on the stories of those who once navigated by the stars, moving toward the unknown with nothing but courage and the will to be free. They think of ancestors who walked through swamps, crossed rivers, and hid in the shadows of the forests, never knowing if they would live to see the next dawn. Their journey was one of survival, but also of faith. Faith in a future that was not yet visible, but deeply felt. The protagonist channels that same determination as they travel to historical sites, meeting with scholars, activists, and distant relatives who help piece together their family's fragmented past. They pore over archives, listen to the oral histories passed down through generations, and step foot on lands once tilled by their ancestors. Each discovery, each new truth, strengthens their resolve and deepens their connection to those who came before. As they continue this pilgrimage, they realize that the North Star is more than just a celestial body. It is a calling, an invitation to rise above oppression, to claim the narratives that were nearly lost, and to walk boldly in the footsteps of those who paved the way. The protagonist no longer feels like they are searching. They are now following a path illuminated by the resilience of their ancestors, leading them toward a future where their history is no longer hidden, but proudly reclaimed. Chapter 13. The Trial of Truth. The search for historical truth leads to conflicts with institutions that seek to bury the past. As the protagonist pushes forward, they encounter archival restrictions, redacted records, and outright denials from organizations that refuse to acknowledge the full extent of slavery's legacy. Museums refuse access to key documents, university scholars dismiss their findings as overstated, and local government officials brush off their inquiries as an attempt to stir up unnecessary division. Despite these barriers, the protagonist refuses to be silenced. They gather evidence, records of slave transactions hidden in legal filings, personal testimonies from descendants of enslaved people, and forgotten ledgers tucked away in dusty library basements. Each discovery paints a clearer picture of the economic and social structures built upon the suffering of their ancestors. Resistance intensifies when the protagonist attempts to share their findings. News outlets refuse to publish their research, and social media debates erupt, with those who insist that the past should remain in the past. They are accused of rewriting history, of dredging up old wounds, of threatening the status quo. Yet, with every pushback, the protagonist grows more determined. They organize lectures, speak at community forums, and find allies among historians, activists, and other descendants who refuse to let history be erased. The journey is exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. There are moments of deep frustration, moments when the weight of opposition feels unbearable. But then, a breakthrough comes. An investigative journalist takes interest in their story, exposing hidden documents that confirm the systemic erasure of slavery's lasting impact. The revelations spark a broader conversation, igniting change in ways the protagonist never imagined. Through persistence, they come to understand that truth is not just about uncovering facts. It is about challenging power, about giving voice to those long silenced, and about ensuring that history is acknowledged, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. The trial of truth is ongoing, but the protagonist now knows they are not alone in the fight. Chapter 14. Breaking the chains within. The emotional burden of the journey reaches its peak, weighing heavily on the protagonist's mind and spirit. Each revelation, each uncovered truth has been both a source of pain and empowerment. They have spent months, even years, peeling back the layers of history, confronting not only the horrors of the past, but also the lasting scars it has left on their family and community. The protagonist finds themselves at a crossroads, overwhelmed by the gravity of what they have learned. The pain threatens to consume them, anger at the injustices endured, sorrow for those lost to time, and frustration at the world's reluctance to fully acknowledge history. Yet, in the depths of this struggle, they come to a realization. History is not just about pain. It is also about resilience, about the strength to rise from suffering and create something meaningful from it. Determined to break free from the chains of historical trauma, the protagonist seeks ways to channel their emotions into action. They begin speaking at schools, sharing their discoveries with students who have never been taught these truths. They organize community workshops, offering a space for others to share their own stories, to grieve, and to heal. They write articles and publish their research, ensuring that their ancestors' voices are heard, not only in hushed whispers, but in bold declarations. Healing does not come easily. It is a slow process, one that requires patience and understanding, not only for themselves, but for those around them. Some still struggle to face the past, afraid of the wounds it may reopen, but the protagonist learns that healing is not about erasing pain. It is about acknowledging it, embracing it, and transforming it into a force for change. Through their journey, they come to understand that breaking the chains within is just as important as breaking the ones imposed by history. By reclaiming their narrative, by using their newfound knowledge to educate and empower others, they turn pain into power, and with each step forward, they honor the resilience of those who came before them, ensuring that their suffering was not in vain, but a foundation for a future built on truth and justice. Chapter 15. A Legacy Reclaimed. With a full picture of their ancestry, the protagonist embraces their identity with pride. The journey that began with unanswered questions and buried truths has led them to an unshakable understanding of who they are and where they come from. No longer defined by the silence and erasure imposed by history, they stand as a bridge between the past and the future, carrying the voices of their ancestors into the present. They vow to honor their lineage by ensuring that these stories do not fade into obscurity. Through writing, speaking, and activism, they amplify the experiences of those who came before, challenging distorted narratives and demanding acknowledgement of historical injustices. They work alongside historians, educators, and community leaders to bring a fuller, unvarnished history into schools and public discourse. Beyond advocacy, the protagonist seeks to create spaces of remembrance and healing. They help establish historical memorials, support programs for descendant communities, and lead initiatives that empower others to trace their own histories. Each step they take is a tribute to the endurance and sacrifices of those who lived before them. Though the weight of history remains, it no longer feels like a burden. It is a source of strength. They understand now that reclaiming their legacy is not just about personal discovery, but about ensuring that no one else is forced to grow up disconnected from their roots. Their ancestors' struggles were not in vain. Their resilience lives on in the protagonist's every action. Standing at the crossroads of past and future, they lift their head high, knowing that the fight for truth, justice, and remembrance is never truly over. But with every word spoken, every lesson taught, and every life impacted, they forge a path forward. One where history is no longer hidden, but embraced, honored, and reclaimed.